to be me? I'll be doing the rest. And Councilman Spencer is going to be WebEx as well.
Welcome back, bud.
Fitzwater,
Present.
Hensley,
Present.
Kimna,
Here.
Lester,
Here.
Schreiber,
Present.
Spencer. See him on there. Spicer,
Present.
Boat, Ward. Here. Wiseman.
Thank you. And the next order of business, Mayor Turgeon will present her budget.
Thank you, Chairman Hensley and City Council Budget Committee. Appreciate the opportunity. And I will start by kind of summarizing the budget letter that you all received last Monday. So I'll just run through some of the highlights of that letter. And for the interest of those watching too, I'll kind of share some of those, even though you all have already had a chance to read and review it. But I definitely want to start by thanking our city employees and recognizing what they do for providing services to the city, and thank all of you for your time on the budget. And also realizing that, as we know, this budget is only a plan and is a certainty that it will change as we move forward. On page one, towards the bottom of the page, how I've emphasized over the last several years, there are three specific areas of concern that I've noted that we are not keeping up in current funding, which is personnel expenses, facilities maintenance, and the purchase of vehicles and equipment. looking at page 2, just to highlight down the middle of the page, the salary and wage adjustments that the budget includes a 3% salary and wage adjustment for all full-time employees and part-time with benefit employees. And skipping down towards the bottom, that salaries are not funded at a level sufficient to implement a meaningful pay per performance merit-based employee performance evaluation process. And but I do really appreciate having the 3% in there. I think that's very important. And as you can see here, why I think it would be nice if it could be more to recognize more of the pay per performance. And then looking at the bottom paragraph, also getting direction from Council Budget Committee that as previously discussed with the Finance Committee meeting, would like some confirmation from the City Council that whether any departments are authorized to award salaries above the 3% salary adjustment, and just getting clarification so it's consistent. Page 3, and this would be probably the main thing to highlight in the letter, is in the middle of the page, the mayor's changes and additions. And I recommend the use of $250,000 of the American Rescue Plan Act funds for eligible stormwater projects. This reduces the use of general revenue funds in the amount of $250,000 in the street department's stormwater materials and labor budget. I recommend the purchase of 2 police vehicles and a 1-ton street truck, and the replacement of some street lights. I reduced the ongoing infrastructure facilities line for the remaining amount there, and in the capital improvement sales tax G, I also recommend reallocating some remaining funds from police field operating equipment to fund 2 police vehicles. The bottom of page 3 does also highlight the impact of not fully funding the capital vehicle and building needs. Means that we are reacting on the occurrence basis, and that's under the some of the fiscal challenges for FY22. So meaning capital expenditures, commodity prices, department budget reductions. On page 4, transit is highlighted, and that is something that throughout the CARES Act that we are subsidizing the general fund for that. And I know that's something that we want to definitely keep in mind, that while we're fortunate to have that from the CARES Act, it is something that we will not have ongoing. So keeping in mind the impact that will have moving forward into the future. And going to page 6, that it is still uncertain at this time the effect that COVID-19 related expenditures will have on the general fund balance. And then also the next paragraph, that it is still uncertain at this time the final FEMA reimbursement for the 2019 tornado and flood disaster. And we continue to work with them on that information. And then also keeping in mind on the mayor's changes and additions, while I do reference utilizing a portion of that for American Rescue Plan Act funds for some of the eligible projects like stormwater and police cars and street department, that also realizing that it is a bit preliminary, that also there's still some guidance coming out. And so we want to make sure as we work with staff that we are working towards projects that are eligible, but also knowing that the budget is separate and aside from the American Rescue Plan Act. So while those are some one-time funds that we would be focusing on separately from the budget process, we know that those items are in here, but I want to keep in mind that that is a completely separate and different process, and we will look forward to having public discussions as we move forward and input on that piece. So a lot of moving parts there. Appreciate you all allowing me a moment to go over some of the changes and views that I had going into the budget. Of course, the budget is done by the city administrator, who then gives it to the mayor and then passes it on to the city council for final review. And over the next several weeks, we'll be working on it. So Councilman Chairman Hensley, appreciate your taking the lead on the budget committee. And it's a wonderful collaboration that, although my budget's already been presented, I appreciate having the opportunity now to see all of the department heads and their presentations, that I did not have the same benefit to hear all of that. So I think working together, I appreciate now the chance that we all have to hear their presentations and work together. So again, thank you to each and every council member. I know there's a lot of items in this budget to review and look at. And if anyone has questions of why I arrived at anything in the budget, certainly feel free to ask, and I'll continue to be very interactive and appreciate that. So I'll turn it back over to you, Councilman Hensley, if there's any questions or comments.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Turgeon, for being here and for presenting your thoughts and those points from the budget, as always. And are there any questions or comments, Councilmember Ward?
Regarding the, I think it's 12,000 for the street lamps. Have those locations been chosen? Are they due to safety concerns? I was just wondering if, how many 12 grand will purchased and where they're located at, because I know we have an agreement with Ameren UE that they replace any broken ones, I know, but I don't know if these are additional, but it does say replacement.
I could have Mr. Marasher, you have that
Yeah,
information?
I understand the question. This memo asking out of the budget. Make sure I'm answering the correct question.
It's a big sheet item.
It's a pink
Oh,
sheet
okay,
item,
yeah, yeah.
Matt.
Is it the, so I think that's referring to streetlights that people would petition for. So, those are at, obviously, but throughout the year, occasionally get a petition. Sometimes it's really easy. We can just go to UE and have them put a light on a pole, and that really doesn't cost us anything. But if you have to add a pole or, some of that kind of, that's what that would be.
And that was the amount that was also left after I did the police cars and the street department items. And it was just that right amount. And it seemed like after looking at some of these expenditures, that was a good fit. It could certainly be changed if council wanted something
Well, that
different.
does address
Oh, and
certain safety
Mrs. Miller.
concerns that a neighborhood may have, because I know I
Sure.
tried to get an additional one that citizens on Mulberry Street were wanting, and I don't think we were ever able to do that. So this pot would be able to do things like that.
It is a pink sheet request under the street department on page 285. And the description reads, materials to replace older city-maintained halogen lights with the more energy-efficient LED street lights.
Okay, it's not talking about, I didn't look it up. I was thinking you were asking about something else, but that other pool, I thought we did put money in as well, a small amount. But this other one, get the sheet, I could have found quickly, but that is to replace some of our own main street lights. So some of these, that would be an example, might be some of these shoe boxes out here in the streets. If some of those bulb, we need to replace those, and they're fairly expensive items. So that's what that one is. Sorry about that.
And part of the
Not
reason
getting
I
to my pink sheets here on my computer.
Part of the reason I chose that as well is that it does increase safety in neighborhoods too, and there's the safety aspect of it, and it's a request that we get pretty commonly, and as we have aging streetlights, it's something that we get calls often about, so felt like that would be a good fit, and also since it was such a small line item there, and that was really a small item that was still left, that we had some funding that would be available and eligible to use, so
Thank you.
thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for the mayor? Councilman Fitzwater. Please.
I'm sorry, Councilman. Other potential funding sources there, and I think those will play out as we go through this process. So I have a concern that we're not moving in a direction because, if other avenues don't become available, we lock in. So I'm concerned that we're not addressing a critical need for the city and kind of prioritizing. And I realize everything we do is a priority. Everybody here is important, but we've got to look at how we spend limited dollars. So that's one concern. So my question is, if we ended up locking into the 3%, could we do it in two formats, a 1% across the board, and then keep 2% of that total available, maybe to push some additional money to police? I know fire is a part of that public safety, but it seems like our most pressing need, at least, as I've looked at it, came from police, and then allow the city administrator, police, fire, and department directors to help us decide how to spread that 2%. So it's an overall 3% increase, but it's not just the flat across the board, which to me seems like it continues to exacerbate our compression issue, and it doesn't give us the ability to go above and beyond for people that, staff members that, there's been a determination. But my critical piece is trying to push additional dollars to police, and I don't see, there's other ways to do it, but we would have to make some cuts. So that's my first question. I don't know if you want me to just lay my questions out there.
Should I address that while we're talking about that? I can
Sure.
get you that answer. And,
Sure.
so the two questions that you addressed, which are very good questions and questions that I also struggled with that I think we all will. The first one is how to address public safety salaries with police and fire in this budget when we're saying we're just doing a 3% for across the board for all of our employees. So the 3% I felt was extremely important to do for everyone. And now, in addition, for the police and fire personnel, the salary issue is something that we are really seeing and is very much brought to light before now, and especially now going through the budget process. And with the public safety tax that we have coming up on November 1st here, that's something that would be able to be at least addressed with that coming up. And the public will see the need for it as well. For some reason, if it wouldn't pass, then we would likely be revisiting pieces of the budget then, if it weren't to. And I hope it would. I know there's been a strong desire in our community to do that. And, salaries would be a part of that, along with some other things too. But as we discussed before, being one of very few communities our size in Missouri that does not have a public safety tax, that we're one of the few that relies on the sources that we currently have. And most of the communities out there, and I think it was about 19 out of 20 have a public safety tax. And this is something that we are a bit behind on and needing to get up to the level that we need the funding to retain the best officers in police and fire, and also retain and attract the best. So knowing that we have the public safety tax on the horizon, being hopeful for the support that would pass, that is where that could come from to address the salary piece. It's extremely important. So I haven't overlooked it, but I'm counting on support for that. If it doesn't, then we're going to have to come back to this table and make some very difficult decisions. I think we're going to have to then look at what will have to be cut out and what services aren't going to happen if we want to get that salary piece to that level that we would like to see. So that is why I don't really have that here, because knowing that here in the very near future that we will have hopefully support there for the funding. The 1% and the 2% that you mentioned, like doing the 1% across the board and allowing the 2% for more of the pay for performance. I also considered that, but looking at the big picture, decided that we need to do a 3% just to keep everybody where they need to be. Steve could probably even elaborate more on that, but it's not really enough to do a pay per performance. In order to do a real pay per performance, we need the 3% for the base, but we need, in addition to that, council could allocate more above the 3% if they wanted to in this budget, and then we could utilize that for additional for pay for performance, but I wouldn't want to necessarily put that on the department directors. I think it would be a challenge for them when they know that really everybody's going to need a 3% just to kind of keep up with the bare minimum for retaining our employees. And I might see if I missed any points there, Steve.
So just following up on what you said, Mary, technically you could do what you said about the different percentages. So that the answer is yes. I think the thought with some of the 3% across the board right now is just to keep the pay plan consistent, just to move it along consistent with what other cities are doing and certainly what inflation's doing. Without doing that, I think it just exacerbates some of the problems with compression, not only in police and fire, but other departments as well. So that, in my mind, is just a way to kind of keep things going, but it certainly doesn't mean that those other issues don't need to be addressed, as the mayor pointed out.
Well, and you mentioned, if the tax were not to pass, we would have to make some drastic decisions. I think we're at the point we need to make some drastic decisions now, so maybe we need to make some adjustments in this fiscal year like we would have to do in the future fiscal year. But I appreciate your comments on that. Carrying forward on that same discussion point, there was a question in regard to potential council direction in regard to salary adjustments outside of what council recommends. I think as we go through this budget process, I feel comfortable trying to put something in place that would emphasize that the city administrator has, the council is setting the amounts in the budget, and there's not authorization outside of this document to make further adjustments. I think what you're asking is requesting specific direction from city council, and what I would like to see is a policy that there aren't adjustments made outside of this that fall outside of the budget, if that's the language we're trying to get to. I know there's some disagreement on what some of that gray area is. So I would support us trying to do something that would make that a little clearer. I don't really have language or how we would go about that. I know we've got some differences of opinion, but I think we ought to insert some direction as council.
Sure, and I guess one of the questions would be whether the guide would be 3% relative to current salaries on a per employee basis, or if the cap would be the personnel services budget line in each departmental budget. Because the appropriation for each department sets a limit on total amount paid for personnel services and for other HR related expenditures like it does any other type of expenditure. So that's one limit. But again, the other limits would be individual employees' current salaries adjusted for the 3% or whatever the final increase would be, essentially eliminating sort of any hope at a merit-based increase or a performance-based increase. So yeah, it's a discussion we need to have for sure.
Well,
And-
yeah.
I know also that Margie's revenue discussion, I think, will also help with some of that clarity too. And I know Margie, you'll have the next couple of agenda items to kind of run through some of this that might even clarify some things that are in my letter as well. So I know she'll do a better job than what I just did kind of going through this. So, and we can maybe go through your questions too, but I think it'll be helpful to have Margie's. But I do think just having a consistent message among all departments is going to be the main thing that will help our city administrator as he's making these approvals, so that it's just consistent and clear, because one of us may be interpreting it one way and other council members might be interpreting it another way. So we just want to make sure it's consistent of what that message is for council. It doesn't have to be decided tonight, but at some point as we move through, I think we'll give some clarity and consistency.
Yeah, correct. And that's what I'm trying to do, is lay it on the table to make the
Appreciate it.
administrator's job
Thank you.
easier and allow us to, give, job's not easy, but, trying to bring some consistency to it that keeps it, and I hate the word, but fair to everybody.
I think important for the broader discussion is what you mentioned in your letter, that the compensation study should be updated so that we'll be prepared. Hopefully the safety tax will pass, and we'll have more good information, up-to-date information to go forward.
You have additional questions?
Yeah, my next question was in regard to the mayor's changes in addition. Yeah, I like the opportunity to address stormwater issues. I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I'm a lot uncomfortable expending the ARPA dollars until we have a little bit better kind of decision. And maybe that's what we're going to be discussing over the next couple months. And, I know we're not going to put it right down to the penny, but I hate to see a process where we're dipping into it for $250,000 here and then we dip into it for $250,000. If we had some idea what our goals and objectives were with those dollars before we immediately put it in the budget. And I realize that creates a problem, because if we take this 250 out, then we've got to find another 250. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable, Mr. Chairman, just dipping into those funds before we've even had a discussion. And I made the comment, when we first got the dollars, it could be a blessing or a curse depending on how we expend those dollars. So I'm uncomfortable with that piece of it. Again, I don't know that we're going to resolve it tonight, but just hate to see us dip in that with, to my knowledge, we've not had a kind of an organized discussion of maybe where our opportunities are. I do like where the dollars are going to, stormwater, and I would anticipate that at the end of the process, there will be a number of those, probably a much larger number than this going to stormwater, but I'd like it in a little bit more organized fashion. But again, that's another question that I raised as I went through it.
And I can tell you too, why I arrived at doing that in this budget is I feel the same as you, that we do need that more further discussion among council. And part of the reason I wanted to put that in here is because, for one, we do have, this is a small amount compared to what we'll have to work with, but also I think mainly that council's talked a lot lately about stormwater and the desire to fund additional. We already have, a substantial amount that we spend every year, but adding to that. And since this stormwater definitely is eligible, we know very clearly that it's eligible. So I wanted to make sure that council knew that this is an option, so that we wouldn't have to necessarily allocate funds from the budget that could be used for other things, knowing that this is a very clearly eligible item. So I wanted at least kind of leave that open, knowing that several council members are very, very concerned and interested in allocating some. So I wanted just to let it be known that that is a possibility, and I think a good possibility, because looking at when we do get in that discussion, like I said, it's separate from this really, but looking at American Rescue Plan is what are some of those big picture items that really will affect the city, that we can really spend those funds on, that would have the biggest impact on our city.
Do we have any update on the status of the final interim rule?
The comment period closed July 16th. We haven't heard anything since then. There's been an updated frequently asked questions that was dated July 19th that just had some clarity. It still is not final.
And my last comment is kind of a general comment. The mayor did a really good job of kind of laying out the basis for in her discussion on transit. And Mrs. Miller scared me to death when she gave us those spreadsheets looking 3 or 4 years out at our fund balances and where we're headed. I have a huge concern of our financial stability if we're not able to make some changes. I think this document lays it out very clearly. Mr. Marash has done a very good job at Public Works for those of us that get to attend those meetings and kind of talking about transit and talking about other things. We've had a broad discussion on parking, which I think is probably an issue that will come back to us. But one thing that was clarified in the document was there was no revenue increases. I think we're all in this together. In regard to transit, I do, and I think the mayor indicated somewhere in the document that maybe it's time to seriously look at a fare increase. I know it's not palatable to a lot. It doesn't generate a lot of dollars when you look at the actual ridership, but it does show a commitment from people that are utilizing services. And the second piece that I briefly talked about as we were going through parking is I do seriously think we need to take a look at our parking fee structure, our meter parking, availability of other technology, and our garage parking. And I say that from somebody that buys 9 spaces every month. But I think our ability, I mean, we're losing a lot of money other than this year on transit. We're making money in parking, and I get that. I don't want to gouge our citizens, but if we have enterprise funds that give us the ability to raise dollars for the city that are going to be expended at some time. So I'd just like to make a general comment that maybe we look at some revenue increases where it's appropriate. Again, not interested in gouging people, but my business has not had an increase in our parking rates for, I think, 2005. I'm not interested in, not begging to spend more dollars, but I also know it takes more to maintain that garage, and we don't even know what the rehab costs are. So I think as Mr. Marash did a great job as we were talking about wastewater when we took those 2 or 3 years where we didn't increase, and then we put the schedule in where we tick it up just a little bit. I think maybe it's time to do that in parking also and bump it up a little bit. And again, I realize we have a big fund balance there, but as we looked at that fund balance when we were trying to decide on asset purchases and expenditures, it would have been nice to have 3 or 4 or 5 million more in that fund, which maybe could have adjusted some decisions. So I just lay that on the table that I think we ought to look at legitimate increase in revenue sources where we have the opportunity, where there's a benefit for the customer that's purchasing it. And with that, I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thanks for all those questions, and thanks also to everyone who provided responses. Are there any other questions? Thank you again, Mayor Turgeon. Next item, the FY22 proposed budget highlights. Ms. Mueller.
Jessica, if we could pull up the PowerPoint, please. Mr. Chair, I'm going to go over the budget PowerPoint, and the budget highlights are kind of interchangeable. We'll be talking about that as well on the little 2-page document. But just wanted to give a really high-level look at the proposed budget. So the total city budget is $64.6 million. You can see that the general fund is $33.8 million of that, which is over 52%. The next highest line item is the wastewater budget at 12 million, and then the Parks and Rec at 10.5 million. Here's a look at the general fund, just the general fund budget expenditure totals, that 33.8 million by department. And we've got the police at 11.6 million is the highest budget, and then fire at almost 8.2, and public works coming in third at about 6.3 million. So here's a pie chart of the total fund expenditures, that 64.6 million by the account classification. So personnel services represents over 57% for the total. And then the next is contractual services. So a lot of that is your wastewater and your street work, big projects. Debt service at 6.5, that's mainly wastewater, but it does include the parks debt service as well. And then repairs and maintenance next at almost 4 million, and then down from there. This is the same look, but just for the general fund expenditures of 33.8 million. So when we look at just general fund, almost 80% of it is personnel services. Then we're down to repairs and maintenance of almost 2 million, which represents the 5.8% slice, and contractual services at 1.9 at the 5.71%. I'm sorry. So as Steve mentioned, the capital projects that are funded with just general fund, we've got capital purchases at 252,000, which is 0.75% slice. And then the 10,000 that's under capital projects facilities is the small amount that was put to that ongoing infrastructure building maintenance project or fund that we created. And that's at 0.03%. So here's another look at the general fund budget, but this is by department. And so you'll see that kind of in the lower quadrants, the yellow and blue and orange, those are police, animal control, and fire. So those three sections are public safety budget, and that's 58.6% of the total. The next highest then is that 18.58%, the green slice, and that's public works. The kind of brick colored over on the left side of 6.77% is planning and protective services. Moving on to revenues. This is for total fund revenues. The sales tax represents a third of our budget, and fees and charges another third. Then we've got our franchise utility taxes and property taxes representing the other bigger pieces. And we'll go over in detail the revenues tonight as well. Just general fund revenues, the sales tax is almost 39%, franchise tax 19%, and the property tax almost 17% of our totals. The fees and charges are 12%. And this is a slide that I think Steve uses in presentations just to give some perspective. So for the median home listing price, according to the MLS in June of this year, is 175,000. So you have a house that's 175,000. Your property taxes would be a little over 1,900. The city's portion of that is less than $185. So unless there are any questions, we can move on to the budget highlights. It's a two-page sheet.
Any questions on this portion? Thank you very much.
So the first, had it right the first time, Jess. Okay. So the number one there is that 64.6 million again that we just went over with the PowerPoint. So I won't go into any more detail than that. 33.8 million of the 64.6 is general fund. The second note there is the pay increase of the 3% and how much by fund that represents. So in total, that 3% that's built into the budget has a price tag of a little over $850,000. 641,000 of that is for the general fund. Then the next in line is almost 93,000 for parks and 65,000 for wastewater. And then the other funds are listed there as well. Also included in the budget is an increase for health and dental insurance. Health insurance, 10% is built in, and dental insurance of 5% is built in. And that total cost is $363,000, with the general fund being $265,000 of that. And then this year we did have an increase in our contribution rate for our loggers retirement. So for general employees, it went from 12.8% to 13.8%. For police, it increased from 18.3% to 19%, and fire increased from 48% to 49%. So those changes are included in the budget, and they're at a total cost of $215,000, $155,000 of that being general fund. We've already kind of discussed with the mayor's budget letter, the transit subsidy for FY22 this year is considerably less than every other year of $187,000 because of the use of the CARES grant funds in the amount of $1,460,000. Otherwise, that would be general fund subsidy. The airport subsidy is $113,317 from the general fund this year. That's also a little bit lower than previous years because the cost of the tower, which is around $90,000 annually, is no longer the city's responsibility. And just want to mention, so then the fund balance estimated ending for FY21 is 17.27%. And in this budget, the way it is proposed now is an FY22 reserved fund balance, unreserved fund balance of 16.79%. With that, I'll take any questions.
Sorry, are there any questions on the budget highlights?
Just health and dental, is that based on trend of how those?
Yes, we are self-insured, so that is we've been spending down our fund balance, and we haven't had increases in the last few years, so it's kind of a pent-up demand as well for our fund balance.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, please proceed to the revenue discussion now.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a revenue tab in your big budget book. I don't plan on going through every single line unless you want me to. I'm just going to highlight some of the notable changes. Okay, I can talk fast. So sales tax is the largest piece of one of the largest pieces of our revenue. It is in this budget, it is projected at a 2.5% increase. As well as a little bit more for the anticipation of St. Mary's going to a for-profit. So there's a little bit built into that. So if that doesn't happen, we might have to adjust in the future. But the last year's average increase, last 3 years' actual average increase is 2.62%. We are currently running more than that. So the 2.5%, I believe, is a conservative number. Moving on to the next section, the intergovernmental taxes. the motor V tax and the gas tax. The gas tax does include an increase from Senate Bill 262 of 2.5 cents. It's about $80,000 annually. And the road and bridge tax has an increase built in that line as well for the Senate Bill 262 gas tax increase of estimated at $60,000. The franchise or the moving on to the next bigger section, the franchise and utility tax. We've been seeing a reduction in those electric and gas utility tax lines. So there is in each one of those lines a 100,000 each reduction in the projection, and that's based on a 1-year rolling average and 3-year rolling averages. The telephone cell utility tax line continues to trend down. That line is a projected 150,000 decrease from the current projections. So in total, that section is 375,000 less than the 21 adopted budget. The property tax section is the next section that moves on to page 17. The totals there, the detail lines are on 16. So we've got an increase for our current property tax based on a 2-year average and a 1-year rolling average. And the surtax receipts and the special tax revenues are showing some increases as well. So in total, those two are about 40,000 more than the 21 adopted budget. Moving on to the charges for services. We've got our admin chargebacks. That is a calculation by finance to take all of the administrative departments, including city administrator, city clerk, human resources, our city attorney's office, finance, IT, and all of those, and basically charging our enterprise funds for the services received by those administrative functions. So that actually increased this year by about $53,000. And then
Is that allocated equally then across all departments? Is there a formula how we determine what?
There is a formula, but what we charge are the enterprise funds and the parks fund. We don't charge like public works because they are a general fund department. So we're basically charging those other funds for the administrative services that happen using general fund dollars to expend it on personnel services, basically. So there is a very detailed formula. It's basically the amount of expenditures that those enterprise funds have in comparison to total. So the theory is that if we're writing a lot of checks because you have a $10 million budget, your share is going to be more than an enterprise fund that is only a $2 million budget. However, since I don't know the beginning of time, I don't know what year it was, but the Parks Fund has not been charged the full administrative chargeback that's included in that calculation. It's pretty close to half.
Was that city council decision, or how did we come to that decision?
I'd say that's been a historical decision, certainly before I've been here. So it's just always done it that way.
Is there a sense of historical current rationale for that would be?
The notes that we have from the historical documents is that instead of charging according to the calculation, there was an agreement to charge 5% of the sales tax collected for the previous 12 months instead of using, or in lieu of using, the administrative charge calculation. So just to give you some perspective, what we calculated was $501,733. What's being charged is the $302,680 in this budget.
So there's about a 200,000 difference. Is it? I didn't hear the first number.
It's,
Roughly 200.
yes, yes.
I don't know what the process would be, Mr. Chairman, but I'd like to at least flag that as, and that would look really nice in the police budget or to help us plug holes somewhere else. If it is equitable with all the other departments. So if we could at least flag to see if that's something we need to look at. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thanks.
So do we know the basis for doing it that separate way? I mean, rather than, I mean,
Essentially, as Margie pointed, it gets approved by council every time you do the budget. I don't know the historical basis for that, but there's not a technical reason for that other than what has been approved by council.
Are there any other questions on this particular point? Please proceed.
Okay, so the total for that section is about 148,000 higher than the adopted 21 budget revenue for that charges for services in total. Moving on to the fees, licenses, and permits, which the total for that is on page 18 of your budget book. There are some changes in here. A large increase is about 107,000 on the building construction fees. And what we try to do there is kind of look forward and anticipate some of those large one-times. So we've got some money in there for AmeriCare Assisted Living that went through the council and a couple of other. So that line item is changed about 107,000 higher than the current 21 adopted budget. So in total, that section is almost 114,000 over the 21 adopted. Moving on to the fines and forfeiture section. We're seeing reductions in court costs and those the traffic fines. So we've got in that section $27,900 less than the current 21 adopted budget.
Sorry, can I ask a question about an item a couple times ago?
Yes.
Thanks. On the parks chargeback item,
Mhm.
For the benefit of everyone on the council, especially myself, where do we find the breakout per department?
I can provide
that
our
would
backup
show
documentation.
the difference applied to parks chargeback to everyone else's chargeback.
Oh,
Is that-
I can provide that
Okay, it's not
documentation.
in the budget though.
No, it's not.
Are you asking the dollar amount or the formula?
Any of
The
it that
dollar
would make it
amount, I
clear
mean, you
to
have,
us
you
that
show the dollar.
Yeah, the dollar amounts are in each of the each of those enterprise funds budget lines,
right.
but I can
But I think we would need to. I mean,
share with you the calculation.
yeah. Okay. So the dollar amounts would be in here, but unless we went through, picked out each dollar amount, and
Mhm.
then knew how to calculate them, we really wouldn't have any idea what we were looking at.
We can provide that document.
Thank you.
While we're at break, guys, on the fines and forfeitures, we're down considerably since 2016, which I don't have a problem with. Why are we down so significantly? Are we writing less tickets or have we changed?
Well,
there
obviously, the
something different in-
FY20 actual is significantly lower because of COVID.
Right.
But I believe that I did receive some information from the city attorney that there are definitely less tickets being written.
Yeah, that's correct. The 2020 COVID essentially enforcement dropped a lot. But there was a downward trend and a significant downward trend that preceded that. And I'd be happy to provide that to the city council if that's something you want to take a look at. So it's kind of a double whammy of a kind of a general downward trend and then a steep decrease in 2020.
No, I like that. I mean, being a city that thrives on pulling people into our community, if we can, and that was part of the reason I raised the question on increasing some parking fees. I mean, I would rather make our revenue there up front so people know what it costs versus aggravating people with fines unnecessarily. And I'm not saying they're writing unnecessary tickets, but if there's a mechanism where we can make it more user-friendly and still generate the appropriate revenue, I like this trend, so.
Margie, just for clarification, that fines and forfeitures, does that include parking fines?
The parking fines is a separate line, Councilman. There's
Never mind what
There's
I
a
just
police
said.
fines traffic, which is the $490,000 annual
Yeah.
proposed. And then there's a parking fines that's 2 lines down from or up from the total for that section. That is the 29,000
Yeah, and
annual.
that traffic label is a bit of a historical misnomer. That includes kind of fines for all crimes that aren't parking in nature. The vast majority are traffic related, but that includes things, stray cats and trespassings and stealings and kind of all those other things as well.
And then there's another line, police tickets, parking, and it looks like we don't record anything there.
Correct.
Okay. I'll need to figure out more about how stray cats and whatnot relate to traffic offenses. That's neither here nor there right now. Any other questions on this point? Okay.
Okay, the next section's on page 19. The contributions / donations. There's only 2 lines here. We've got animal shelter donations, and those have actually been running around 21,000. And then the street repair solid waste line of 351,788 is a contractual amount with our contract with Republic Services to pay for damages to roads. That was part of the contract. And that does have an increase based on CPI every year. The next section is other operating revenues. We've got some revenue share from our purchasing card program, and then some insurance claims and cafeteria refunds. So just some small stuff. Our interest revenues, we've got an increase built in there for the additional American Rescue Plan funds that we have in the bank currently. And there is some guidance from American Rescue Plan in the frequently asked questions that interest income can be used in any manner. It doesn't have to be a program or anything related to the ARPA at all.
Councilman Lesser?
So I see in previous years you had some for, I see you had some for police evidence funds, but you don't have anything projected out. Is that?
We don't estimate revenue for there. If we get it, we bring it forward as a budget amendment to the council, and then they can spend the funds that are brought in, but we don't budget for that.
So the interest income that you were mentioning, we're seeing it right now on the revenue side, but that I assume has just been allocated throughout the proposed budget in the general fund. Okay, so it's not sitting there discretionary for us.
It's part of our total budget revenue that's been used to balance the budget, yes.
Great, thank you.
And then the other non-operating revenues includes sale of assets, and that's just an estimate based on historical sale of vehicles and equipment and so on. The transfers in section on page 20, we've got the transfer for the lodging tax of the 26,400. And then the carryover surplus section, that's where we have that transfer of the 250,000 ARPA out of the fund balance to put into the general fund, then to fund those items that the mayor mentioned. The entitlement grant is in the middle of the page. That's our CDBG grant, 320,000. Moving on to page 21. Our school resource officers, this is basically an agreement or contract that we have with the Jeff City school districts. And it has increased. It's based on 50% of the total school resource office expenditures, not just their salaries, but their total expenditures. So when the police department presents the school resource officer budget, 50% of that is being basically reimbursed or funded by the Jeff City School District. We've got a small amount for Mustang grants, 6,000. The next page, on page 22, we've got our MPO.
Could I just ask a question on the school resource officer? And I assume we'll cover that when we go through other budgets. It used to be skewed one way. Did we used to pick up a larger piece of that or a smaller piece?
We only charge the school district the personnel services line. So the other materials and supplies and their repairs and maintenance and training and education and all those other expenses that go along with those personnel, we're not being charged to the schools. So now instead of just looking at personnel services, we look at the total department budget for school resource officers and take 50% of that.
This is a large item. I know police did a really good job of discussing in the past why it was a benefit for the city to pick up part of this cost. And I understand, the 50-50, but I'll wait till that budget gets here, but it's a huge number. I understand the need for it. Someone needs to pay for it. I appreciated their discussion on it. It just, my first year through the budget, it just caught me off guard, I guess, that half of it was pushed to us. I'll wait for that discussion, but just something to flag as we're looking for funds to send other places.
I think we kind of ended up on page 22, the redevelopment grant section, the local grants of 20,500. Those are contractual with that Republic Services contract, and also a small amount from the county for household hazardous waste. So the totals on page 23 of $33,817,729.62 represents an increase of $957,667.93 over the 21 adopted budget for revenues. Be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? So Ms. Mueller, you're comfortable with these projections?
Yes, they are my projections.
Professional opinion. And then normally you look for some action from us at this point.
Yes, it's normal to go ahead and approve the revenue budget to kind of move forward with the discussion then on the expenditures by department.
Great. And obviously I assume that there are no changes to these projections that you would encourage us to consider at this time.
Not at this time.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments or a motion?
Report on the totals.
So, great. That's a motion to approve and adopt. there any other discussion on this topic? Councilman Fitzwater?
Would you just clarify what the motion means then, as we move forward?
Or you all would elaborate.
Or we talked about some potential increases, so we've still got the ability to discuss these other items at a later point. We're just
Yes.
basically adopting what you presented to us so far.
Correct.
Thank you.
And that way is the basis for the 33.8 million that the department directors will be coming forward, or the 64.6 million that department directors will be coming forward and presenting their proposed expenditures. And then there's obviously room for discussion and changes by council.
Thank you.
Councilman Spencer?
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I just had a quick question as far as, and it kind of echoes a little bit with what Councilman Fitzwater was asking. My question relates to increases or changes to administrative fees to potential other departments like Parks and Rec. So if we wanted to increase the administrative fee with Parks and Rec, that could be done in later discussions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Donaldson, roll call, please.
Fitzwater,
All right.
Hensley,
Aye.
Kimna,
Aye.
Lester,
Aye.
Schreiber, Spencer, Spicer,
Aye.
Vote,
Aye.
Ward,
Aye.
Wiseman.
Thank you. Motion passes. We've adopted those projections for now. Next item is the 5-year financial plan.
So I've got some extra printed copies. I know that it's pretty hard to read on your electronic version if you'd like. So as part of the city's financial policies, we've got a long-range planning, and the purpose is to ensure the city assesses the long-term financial implications of current and proposed operating and capital budgets, budget policies, cash management, and investment policies, programs, and assumptions. So the policy is that the city will adopt a budget that includes a multi-year analysis, meaning there is a presentation of the multi-year analysis. It will establish some assumptions for revenues, expenditures, and changes to fund balance over a 5-year horizon. And the assumptions will be evaluated periodically as part of the budget process. So that's the purpose of bringing forward this 5-year forecast. There are sheets in here for each of the enterprise funds and the general fund. There's actually 2 sheets for the general fund. The first one, the first page and the second page are the general fund. They are both the same except for one line item. And that is that the first document that has the title 4% projected unexpended has a line item right above the yellow highlighted area that shows historically we do not spend 100% of our budgeted expenditures. And so we've looked at, since 2013, there's been highs of over 6% unexpended. In 2019, there was actually a lower amount because we used that money to pay for our disaster until we applied for the FEMA reimbursements, and so that was like at 2.5%. But historically, it runs closer to 5% unexpended. So what I've built in here is a very conservative 4% of what's budgeted doesn't get expended. And that ranges from 1.3 up to, when we get up to 2026, almost 1.6 million. So using that basis, we fall within our 17% minimum unreserved fund balance guidelines until we hit 2024, 2025, and 2026. Now, I do want to point out that kind of in the middle of the page where it's highlighted purple and blue, we've got vehicle and equipment purchases and ongoing infrastructure. Those are actually built into those out years at what we estimate we should be spending every year. So that is a large chunk that brings that fund balance down. And obviously, we haven't been spending that in our current year or this projected or approved mayor's budget of 2022. So the second sheet of the general fund has exactly the same numbers, except it does not have that 4% unexpended. And you can see how that affects the fund balance at the very bottom of the page, down to a negative amount in 2024. We all know that's not going to happen. And then we've got a sheet for airport, parking, transit, and wastewater. I just want to point out on the airport, there is a line in there that is under the revenue section called transfers in, and that is the projected general fund subsidy. So in our current proposed budget, it's 113,000. It goes up to 228,000 in 2026. And on that same note, in transit, there is that line item in the budget section called transfers in that currently is at 187,000. You can see those prior year actuals at 1.3, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2. That's the normal amount. That's where we were talking about the CARES Act funding being used instead of the general fund subsidy. But in those out years, starting in 2023, we're going to have to be using general fund to subsidize once again because those CARES Act funds will be depleted. And unless you have any specific questions, I know I went over that fairly quickly, but there are in the box, I'll just point out on the general fund page and on some of these other pages, there's a box in the right-hand upper corner that has shaded gray that kind of puts in some of the assumptions that are used for those out years. So the revenue increase of 1.34%, and then basically personnel services and other expenditure lines going up about 2%.
Are there any questions or comments on the 5-year financial plan presentation? Seeing none. Oh, Councilman Fitzwater.
Well, I've got a question. I'd defer to the city administrator, but maybe it's addressed as we go through. But just a general discussion at some point on transit. And we're losing a lot of dollars. But I know as we go through some of the things at Public Works, it's much broader than just looking at the number. I mean, the boxes that we have to check as a city providing transit services. So is there a time that we could have that discussion? Because as we talk to the public, most people look at that number, and I get it from a business perspective. If you look just at that number, but there's a lot of other things that go into the transit system that it's hard to calculate into that specific number because it helps us check boxes in other areas, I believe. But is there a way to have that discussion so we have a little bit more background as we try to address why does this city continue to lose $1 million a year on a bus service or $1 million? And maybe I'm not asking a question.
Yeah,
good.
well, it's not unusual for a city to subsidize transit with other funds from other places. And rarely do they cover all of their expenses, so that's not unusual. We have had in the past some discussions with council about raising the fare, and council decided at that time not to, but that's certainly something that could be discussed again, as you noted earlier. There are some other related kinds of issues with transit that we certainly could talk at budget time or maybe at a committee meeting, which would allow, more in-depth kind of a conversation about those.
Well, my question relates to, you hear the comment, well, we ought to just get out of the transit business, which sounds good, other than hard for a city to get out of the transit business. So if there are other factors that go in as we go through, and maybe this is not the best place to
Yeah, I
have
think
the
it's just a
discussion.
matter of being able to provide a service that's certainly used. And, there are a lot of federal funds that go into that, particularly for acquisition, that help buy buses, for example. There's a lot of people that depend on that particular service. And I think it certainly speaks well to a capital city having a transit service available, albeit, somewhat limited in, some of the hours and days that we have. There's certainly a benefit there, but I don't think it's necessarily connected to anything else. I mean, Mr. Morash, you may want to be able to opine, but I don't think there's one thing that it necessarily provides that would be taken away other than a transit-related kind of.
Yeah, is the question maybe is the economic benefit? Have some of these studies for airport things. I'm sure we have one for transit. I can't think of it. And certainly look at it.
Which is similar to the airport,
Yeah,
too. I mean, now, if the question there's some other entities that might be appropriate to discuss additional funding sources for transit, such as the county, since we're in the county, that's certainly something that might be to do.
In a business model, and I understand we're not a business, you would say that service is losing a massive sum of money, we're just not going to do it. But it seems like as we were going through some of the grants, it helps you if you can check that box for other things. So maybe it doesn't relate directly to transit, but it helps get something else for the city. I'm just trying to define.
Yeah.
Because, we can't sustain losing this kind of money other than, we don't have a lot of other options other than trying to find a little bit of resources.
It's certainly directly service related. I mean, you have a lot of people, medical, with handy wheels that depend on the service. So certainly directly related to the kinds of services that are provided by that.
Councilman Spicer.
I think transit's definitely a need. I also think that not that big of a deal to see about maybe raising the fare $1 to $1.25, or I don't think that's that big of a deal. I mean, I know it's important. People got to get to the doctor. I understand that. I'm all for that, but Councilman Fitzwater said, it's tough to look at when we continue to lose money. So we have to try to find a way to try to get some of it back. And I think raising it a quarter, I don't think it's that big of a.
Councilman Kemna.
I agree with that. I think we also have to look at the target audience of why we're using the transit. I mean, it may not be a big a deal for us, but for a lot of these people that use the bus, it's a huge deal. I work downtown and I've had people come in and ask me for money, just so they can get around. So I think we need to be really leery as far as, maybe $1.25 isn't big for us, but it is for a lot of these people on subsidized income and low income housing. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you for those comments. Any other comments? Any final comments from anyone? Oh, Councilman Spencer.
Thank you again. I just think transit and Councilman Hensley, I understand the echo issue now that you relayed earlier at the previous meeting. So my apologies if I start and stop on some of this, but I think now it's prudent to have a serious in-depth discussion about transit. We're at a luxury, so to speak, with having the federal CARES Act money available to subsidize this budget for us for the next 2 years. So I think we have a little bit of time to have this discussion in the public about the potential of raising rates. And I do understand Councilman Kimna's hesitance about doing that. But, if we didn't have the federal funds available to us, our budget discussion would be, I think, a whole lot different. And so I think we as a body of the council really need to do our due diligence and have those serious, hard discussions. And I think now is a perfect time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Crowell.
Sorry, but I thought you were getting ready to move on. If we do have some time and you're interested, maybe Ms. Miller could go through the capital sheets, the big sheets really quickly and just make sure everybody's kind of reading those the same way. Shouldn't take too long if that's
Sure, yeah,
okay.
and just as a point of housekeeping, these meetings have traditionally been capped at about 90 minutes and I guess at about 80 change right now. The next two meetings will probably easily exceed 2 hours each of them. I have no problem if it means going a little bit long. And maybe we won't need to. So unless there's an objection, happy to spend the rest of our meeting.
Yeah, this won't take very long.
Okay.
At the very end of your budget book, so on the electronic version, it's the pink sheet summary. With the printed ones, it's in a little plastic insert at the very back of your budget book. I just want to explain the layout and what the information that's included in here. Like this. Yeah, all the way in the back. And on the electronic version, it's the very last 3 pages. So this is a summary of the pink sheet requests by department. So the department directors will, each tab of their department has their operating budget line itemed, and then any pink sheet requests or new funding items are the next after that operating budget line item. And so what we've done here with these sheets is to summarize in total for the general fund, the first sheet, all of those requests. So starting with the left-hand column is just a summary of the revenues that we just talked about, the 33.8 million. You'll see 33.5 because we've broken out that transit subsidy and airport subsidy so you can see that clearly. But it's the same information that was presented tonight, and it includes then the projected fund balance at the end of FY21 and then also at the end of FY22. So that's in that first column, the far left column. The second section are the additional positions or personnel services being requested in the pink sheets. And you can see by department those summaries that each department director can respond to questions about. But in total, that request is $1,346,000. Now, none of those got funded in this budget. The only items that got funded in this budget are shaded in green. So the next section, section 3, are the additional vehicles and equipment. And you'll see the first few items there are police vehicles. The first 2 have asterisks by them. And if you look down at the footnote, 2 of the police vehicles were funded using sales tax G funds. So because that's not a general fund, we wanted to make a note of that here. And then the next 2 that are shaded in green are funded in the general fund budget. And then a little bit further down that section are the 2 one-ton heavy-duty trucks for streets that the mayor mentioned, and the replacement street lights of $12,000 she mentioned in her budget letter. But the total requested is $5,478,000. And then the last section are those additional miscellaneous requests. There's some big ticket items in here, including some amounts for our health insurance fund, for a lump sum payment to loggers for police and fire to reduce those percentages we pay annually. The Hyde Park burn building replacement of 1.9 is included in there. So those requests total 6.2 million, and in this budget, only 6,000, that accident prevention money in the non-departmental is funded. We also have sheets for the enterprise funds, same concept. If it's funded, it's shaded in green. And then the parks is the last page. So I just wanted to point out the summary pages. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions on our pink sheet tutorial? Seeing none, thank you for the bonus presentation. Okay, well, that's the end of the business of our first meeting. Our next meeting of the Budget Committee will be this Thursday evening at 5:30. And we'll begin the departmental presentations. I believe this Thursday, are we gonna start with Public Works? Is there a request for that?
Yes.
Mr. Marash? Okay, great. So Public Works and then the administration budgets, fire and police will be this Thursday. And then the following Thursday, we will continue with the enterprise funds, planning and protective services, and parks. Does that match everyone's understanding, expectations? Great. Well, thanks everyone who presented tonight. Mayor Turgeon, Ms. Mueller, and everyone else who provided helpful info, and everyone who asked questions. And we'll see everybody this Thursday.
Thank you.
Is there a final motion? I'll take it. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.